Hello everyone, my name is Jake Kurth. I'm with Leeds Forensic Systems. Thanks for coming back to another one of our Leeds Helpful Tips live streams. Every week on Wednesday we go through some topics about our products that we feel may be helpful and useful for our criminalists in crime labs using our products. And it's a new topic every week. Today's topic is all about light sources for our trace comparison microscopes. The model I have behind me is our LCT comparison microscope, but really these lighting options are available for any of our comparison scopes, whether it be a 15-year-old trace comparison microscope you bought from us 15 years ago, or one of our newer Trace Z based comparison microscopes. So yeah, we'll dive into it in a quick minute. Just as a quick note, this is a live stream, so if things do happen, internet goes out, just give me a moment, I'll bring it back. And if you have a Google account or are comfortable logging in, there's a little questions window in the live chat that you can type your questions in, and I'll answer them as I'm best able to. All right, so illumination, lighting the way. Let's talk about it. So where we're going to start first is about bright field, specifically the transmitted light options for trace comparison microscopes. One of the things that Leeds does on our comparison scopes is for transmitted light, we use a single light source. And the reason we do that is that single light source then is connected to a randomized fiber optic cable, so we get even light to both sides of the comparison scope. In the past, we would most often, before LEDs became really big, more on that in a moment, in the past what we most often sell for that single light source is something similar to this. This isn't exactly the model that we would sell, but what this is a halogen light source. So halogen light sources, if you think about it, it's really just it's a light bulb, essentially. And it's not an LED, it's a light bulb. And as we turn it on, there's a little rheostat, and then you can adjust the intensity of that light. Now, the downside of halogen light sources, while they're really bright and they're really powerful, is they generate a lot of heat, and then they go through bulb replacements. But I don't know if you can tell, maybe not, but maybe a little bit. But as you adjust the intensity of the light source, the color rendering of the light source itself changes. So what you'll see is as you increase the intensity of a halogen light source, greater and greater, at higher and higher current or voltage, don't quote me on that, as long as you increase the intensity of your light source, what it'll end up happening is the light will get brighter and brighter, but not only will it get brighter, it'll also get more even within the color rendering that it has. And so what you would invariably end up doing is you would crank your light source if you wanted the best color rendering, which most trace examiners that I've worked with will really be focused on color, is you'll crank your light source all the way to the max, and then what you'll use is a blue daylight filter, a little piece of blue glass that goes on the bottom of the microscope. But the problem is then your lights, while it's very corrected and very good in color rendering, it's just way too bright. And so what you would do in the past is with the halogen sources, you'll have these what are called neutral density filters. And essentially it's just smoked glass. Think sunscreen, or think sunglasses that you just insert into the light path. Downside, you can see you do a lot. You do a lot to try to get good color rendering with a halogen light source. You've got to go maximum intensity, and then you've got to put a blue daylight filter to get rid of that yellow tint to the light. And then you have to use, if you don't want to go blind, or you're working at low power and you have a lot of light, you'll need to use these neutral density filters to reduce the intensity. It works, it's good, used on comparison scopes for years, but there's something better. What's better, and what we get really excited about at Leeds, and what we most often sell on our comparison microscopes now, are LED light sources. And so I have an example right here, and this is what we most often sell. And we can still quote, we still sometimes do sell halogen light sources for our comparison scopes for labs that want to keep that or have trained and worked on extensively just with that halogen light and that color rendering. But more and more often we're selling our LED fiber optic illuminator. And so one of the cool things about the LED is, one, I didn't plug it in. I'll do that in a moment. And actually I'll just show you through the comparison scope in a moment. But the cool thing about the LED is that unlike the halogen light source, it has constant color rendering at all intensities. So as you increase the intensity of the light source itself, it doesn't get brighter, or it gets brighter, but it doesn't get whiter or more cooler in color temp. And as you decrease it, it doesn't get warmer in color temp. And so what that means is when you're working on a trace comparison and you're changing magnifications, moving up, moving down, you can just freely adjust the intensity of the light without changing that color rendering. The LED light source, at least the fiber optic one, this one that we build, when people ask me, what's the biggest upgrade or what would you recommend upgrading on an existing trace comparison scope, I honestly think that our LED fiber optic illuminator is one of the biggest improvements in quality of life working on the comparison scope. That way you're not playing with neutral density filters, you're not playing with the blue daylight filter, and it also allows you to have that really good white color rendering at all intensities. And I'll show you that in a moment. Okay, so this is a view of the comparison scope behind me. I'm using one of our LED fiber optic light sources, and you know it's live because I can move the stage around, and so you can kind of see what we're working with. What's cool is this shows a couple things. You can see how even our backgrounds are, and I like this example a lot. These are two very similar red fibers, and this is where you really want that color rendering to be able to see those subtle differences between the two. I learned very quickly I don't see color like a trace examiner, so a trace examiner, I never argue color with a trace examiner. A trace examiner would look at this and they'd tell me a lot, I suspect, about the color differences. But the important thing is that I have an even background, my color is good, everything's color, and what's kind of cool is you'll see it, as I change my light intensity, I'm reducing it, but I have the auto exposure on. You can see that regardless of where I place my light intensity, either all the way down or all the way up, with that auto exposure on, what's important is you're not seeing a change in that color at all, of the background or of what's on the fiber. And so maybe this isn't translating well through the internet, but this is a really big deal when you're doing critical hair comparisons or critical fiber comparisons and you're changing magnifications and then you need to change your light, but you don't have to play with, well, as I said before, the blue daylight filter, all those other settings. You can just go do your comparison and you're good to go. So yeah, long story short, I really like the transmitted light LED fiber optic. It really makes a big improvement, and I think it's pretty impressive on how you can change your light intensity without having really any effect on the color rendering that you're seeing. So now let's talk a little bit about fluorescence illumination. So for fluorescence illumination, we also kind of saw the same thing. The picture I'm showing you right here is one of our LCT comparison microscopes that has been equipped with a mercury burner or a mercury light source. Essentially, a mercury light source has been the gold standard for as long as I've been in microscopy, and it's certainly longer than that. It's been used for fluorescence microscopy for basically about ever, as far as I'm aware. And what it does is it's an arc lamp, and it generates this huge amount of light that then you can use to excite whatever it is that you're looking at in fluorescence. By being an arc lamp, that means you've got a lot of heat, a lot of light, and you've got some tolerances that you have to really maintain. And so whenever you have a bulb go out, there's this centering process that you have to recenter the bulb, and it works well. But there's something a little bit better with LEDs, and that's, let me see if I get this, and that's this style. So X-Sight is the model that we most often sell when someone's working on a new comparison scope from the ground up. The advantage is that this is an LED, so it's got really long working hours. You don't have to do bulb centration, you don't have to do that kind of stuff. But it's also really bright because unlike a mercury arc lamp, which has a lot of waste heat, the LED itself emits really the spectrum that we're interested in. And it's broader than the mercury arc lamp. Another neat thing about the 120 or these LEDs, these fluorescence LEDs, is it also opens up a whole new avenue of being able to do reflected light techniques, not just fluorescence techniques. So let's bring this one back. with this example of the mercury arc lamp, or the mercury burner on my comparison scope for fluorescence, if I wanted to add in a separate light source for reflected light, frequently what I'd have to do in the past is actually put I don't know if you can see my mouse, but I'd have to put a Y-split right at where this mercury burner attaches to the reflector. And that Y-split, we would attach another light source, a halogen light source. And so you'd have to switch between the mercury arc lamp or the halogen light source, depending if you're doing reflected light bright field, reflected light pole, those type of things. Whereas, bring this back, if we were using, and I don't have a good side view of it, I do have it on this microscope behind me, and actually maybe you can kind of see it in the background. Whereas with this microscope, because it's LED, because it has a broad spectrum of light, we actually only need the single light source, which lets us do both fluorescence as well as reflected light techniques. So that's a really big one that I highly recommend for the work life. There's kind of an intermediate step between these two light sources for reflected light for fluorescence. It's something called a metal halide. And essentially it's an advanced version of a mercury burner, or a mercury light source is the best way to put it. Instead of having the lamp house directly attached to the reflector, what it has is a long liquid light guide. So think of fiber optic cable, but it's filled with oil. And then that goes down to your light source itself. There are reasons to pick mercury versus metal halide and metal halide versus mercury. One of the reasons I think some people are interested in metal halide is that it's not a burner that's directly attached to the scope. Generally, I think it has longer work hours. But the downside is you do have to replace those cables every once in a while because they'll naturally degrade. So, long and the short of it is, if you're looking at a new comparison scope or you're looking to upgrade a comparison scope, the LEDs now are really powerful. They give you all the fluorescence you'll need, plus they give you constant color rendering and allows you to do some techniques that you might not have been feasible before without a significantly bigger budget. So, hope I didn't rush through things. Yeah, again, just going back to that live camera view, I don't know, I think it's pretty cool. We can switch mags. So now we're at, we still have that good color balance, we're still color. And again, I can just increase my light intensity or decrease it. I love that. I think that's really cool. So I'm going to check to see if we have any questions. So if you had any questions, please feel free to email me. My email address is jkurth@leedsmicro.com. Hopefully this stream is helpful in picking out light sources or just discussing light sources.